Hello, everyone. It's so good to have you with us today on our Facebook live chat for Family Search Middle East and North Africa, and our Facebook live channel where we at Family Search are really working hard to help people connect their families, past, present, and future, through records, through memory sharing, and through building groups together. So we are super excited to have you with us today as we talk about how do we overcome challenges as we try to connect with our family roots in the Middle East. And we're so happy to have Dr. Akram Khater from the North Carolina State University. He's the professor of history there. He's also the director of the Khairallah Center for the Lebanese Diaspora Studies. And I really appreciate him being here. He's an expert on not only Middle East history and culture, but also Arab American immigrant history and studies as well. So welcome, Dr. Khater. Dr. Akram, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure.
Akram said I can call him Akram, so I really appreciate that. It's nice to have a conversation with a friend. Well, like many of you, I too am an American, Arab American, if you will, an immigrant my family comes from Palestine and Lebanon. And for many of us, we might be first generation, we might be second, third, maybe even fourth generation. And we all have this inner desire to continue to maintain our heritage, to maintain our roots and keep that connection and pass it on, hopefully, to our children. We're very proud of those family connections. And we know that family is so important for our Middle Eastern culture. But sometimes it can be really frustrating, especially if we've been now 2 or 3 generations removed from our homeland, to be able to go back and reconnect with that. And so we're really looking forward to Akram's input and advice as he helps us to overcome. We're going to talk about 3 challenges today that kind of make it difficult for us to reconnect. And he's going to offer some advice as to what those 3 challenges are and then how do we overcome them. So thanks again, Akram, for being with us. And we're really looking forward to your input. So the question again that I have, and that I think we all have, is from your experience, what do you find to be the top 3 challenges to connecting with our homeland roots and our family members there? And how can people overcome these?
Absolutely. And thank you again, Natalie and Family Search, for all the work that you guys do to make those connections. And really, it's a labor of love on the part of Family Search, as well as a part of our center, the center that I lead. So here at the center, we get, as I'm sure with Family Search, we get a lot of people that communicate with us, asking us to help them find their ancestors, whether it's in Palestine, Syria, or Lebanon, and even beyond that in the rest of the Middle East. And they speak a lot about their frustrations. And if I was to boil them down, for a lot of people who are living in the diaspora, whether it's North or South America, Australia, or various other places, they really are, to a certain extent, used to, and may I say also, spoiled by Family Search and other genealogical search engines, because they go in, it's a digital platform, they type in a word, and out of millions upon millions of records, it pulls up any information based on that. So one of the first challenges is that there's nothing like that within the Middle East. There is no central database that you can go to easily and do that. The second challenge is that what you find is when you try to go even to the Middle East yourself, and I can give examples of that, and Natalie, I think you've experienced this, and you start asking around. You start asking, acquaintances, friends, family, even extended family. You start asking them about your family history. And immediately what you get facing is a wall of suspicion, because the first question in their mind is, why are you asking this question? And specifically, they're worried that behind your queries about your family is your desire to find out your inheritance and to reclaim that inheritance. And substantiating that are a number of legal cases that have been brought by people in the diaspora to reclaim that land. So there is anecdotal evidence that in some ways feeds this paranoia. And the third element is language. So for a lot of people in the diaspora, many of them are no longer speaking the languages of their ancestors, their great grandparents or great grandparents, be it Arabic or Farsi or Turkish. And so for them to go looking through these things become very problematic. And not only are we talking about just whether you know a little bit of Arabic or not, we're talking about specifically archival Arabic language, which is very, very difficult to fathom. So those are the three main challenges that I would say that people face.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. I have experienced actually every single one of them. Certainly, I've asked acquaintances or kind of distant family about it, and that was the first question: is like, why are you asking? Is this about inheritance? Like, they were very upfront about that. And language. I can still read and write Arabic, but again, I'm certainly not an advanced Arabic speaker. And so to be able to even know some of the words or how to read some of those records, how to ask for them is definitely a challenge.
Yeah,
so
it is.
When we look at, let's talk about language here for a minute. Like, how can we do that? How do we cross this barrier of language, of communication, which is so essential for us to be able to build that trust, right? To overcome some of that suspicious, right? And also to be able to use whatever records information that's available to us that might be in that language.
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these challenges and possible ways we can overcome them. But let's start out with this idea of language. And I think ultimately, we can certainly ask people to go ahead and learn Arabic or learn Turkish or learn Farsi. But that's, a lifelong process. It's very involved. And quite honestly, even if they do learn it, I actually would give a 15-week, semester-long course on reading archival Arabic, because archival Arabic isn't the same as modern standard Arabic, which is what most people speak today. And it's not the same both in terms of syntax, grammar, and the way people write it. Because quite often, actually, the people who are writing in that time period are writing this incredibly difficult to read slanted Arabic that it would take forever for them to read. So really, it is very difficult for us to tell people, go learn Arabic and then go acquire it. So I would say that ultimately, the answer to all the three problems that I addressed at the beginning is building relationships. So where, again, here we can anonymously sit at our computer day and night and enter some search text strings or words and find information. To really, at this point, at least at this point where we are in terms of the genealogical records in the Middle East, which are widely dispersed, by the way, which is another problem we can talk about, it is about building relations. Building relations over time so that people can trust you. So when you ask them the question, by the way, I'm looking for my great-grandparents, are the church records or the Sharia courts records available? Then they are trusting that you're not there just kind of fly by night. Because genealogy is about human relations in the Middle East, as it is here, but is much more so. It's not mediated digitally. So I think the answer in many ways is to really look for that relationship. And that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's one of the elements that we have. Because really compounding it isn't just language, because obviously language is an obstacle, but it's also learning to navigate where the records are. And quite frankly, a lot of people in the region don't know where the records are. So they're not being, obfuscating or obstructionist. They really don't know where the records are, right? It could be, for example, to take one example, you're looking for 19th century records. Okay, primarily this whole area was under the Ottoman Empire. So there are census records beginning in the 1840s, 1850s, and afterwards, in which you have village records called tapu records that are kept in the central archives of the Ottoman, of the Ottoman, which is today Istanbul in Turkey. Well, to get access to that, you can't just ask people to go do it. Or even if you go to the parish and you ask a priest, say, excuse me, can I look at the records? I mean, this is an experience I've had, and many people have had, and I think, Natalie, you've experienced it. They tell you, oh, no, they're not here, they're disappeared. Partly because they don't know, but partly they don't trust you. So the point I'm trying to make is you've got to build that relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as I've kind of gone through this, down this path too, and I've noticed too, sometimes you start with the relationships closest to you, the people that you know, and asking for a referral, almost like when you're looking for a job, you're hoping somebody else can vouch for you as you work your way through to finding maybe the record keepers, if you will, the record custodians, to get an introduction to that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes, I don't know, do you find that maybe some of those individuals, maybe the holder of the record, are they ever helpful in helping you to read or translate some of those if you find them?
I think, again, like with most people in the world, it depends upon the individuals that you're encountering, right? If let's take, for example, somebody who works in the Sharia court, Islamic Sharia court. in
Yeah.
the city of Saida in South Lebanon or in Ramallah in Palestine. And let's assume this person is underpaid, overworked like the rest of humanity, and it's a hot summer day, and you arrive there and you're asking a question bluntly to them, can you help me with this? Well, at that point, they're gonna say, oh no, that doesn't exist, right? I mean, that's their knee-jerk reaction. Uh, so I think it's about, again, having perhaps an intermediary, somebody who knows this person, that would be very helpful to introduce you and vouch for you. Say, I know this person. This is a relative come from America, and there are people who've done that. And again, it's not going to happen in one visit. It's going to be over time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a lot of patience. But I think you hit upon something very important, Natalie, because again, we're looking for records a lot of the times, and those are very important. And I see some questions that are asking about that.
Yeah.
But more frequently than not, oral histories that are transmitted from person to person, they are actually going to be your first and quite possibly your most reliable source for your genealogical records. So again, it's almost that you're going to have to get that thread, and it could be somebody who's an aunt who's living in, let's say in Oklahoma City, and you talk to her, and she says, well, I think we have a relative who lives in this town who might have some information. It is really kind of a lot of that personal detective work, which can be very frustrating. But on the flip side, it could be so fulfilling because what you're doing is you're building these rich, detailed relationships that are, in many ways, a lot more animated and human and alive than a record.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're getting various comments about people looking for their records, even North Africa, Algeria, Palestinian, Maronite Christian records, and so forth. And
Cool.
yeah, it can be frustrating. So the other question I have too. So let's say you're maybe third generation, maybe fourth generation. Maybe you don't have so many contacts in the region. Actually, it's a twofold question a little bit. One is, how can you kind of get there? How can you find people or make your pathway through that connection? But the other one too is, as we communicate our desire, as we communicate what we're trying to do, are there some cultural nuances that maybe we have become maybe a little desensitized from that are specific to the region, right? That are maybe American approach or another cultural approach has kind of taken over our personality now. And
Sure.
anyways, that might hinder us from getting those or forming those relationships.
Absolutely, and that's a very very important question that you raised, Natalie. So, I think in many ways, when let's assume we're talking about individuals who may not have an immediate knowledge of somebody on the ground in Algeria and Palestine and Syria and Iraq and Egypt and Lebanon, they've lost all these kind of connections. Well, there are organizations, right? For example, the Ramallah Club. The Ramallah Club is probably one of the largest gatherings of Palestinian Americans. Or the Southern Federation for Syrian Lebanese American Clubs, an establishment, a heritage organization that has been around since the 1930s. You start with these organizations that are maintaining a connection to the heritage, to the history, and you work your way through that. The Arab American National Museum is very helpful. My colleagues there, we try to be as helpful as we can, although we're not a genealogical research center, but we try to help by putting people in connection. So in essence, you go through these Arab American organizations that are in place to try to build that relationship. Because again, here I emphasize, this is going to take time, patience, and a lot of humility. Because you are going to be criticized for being too American. How can you not speak Arabic? You arrive there because in many ways we are Arab Americans, with the emphasis on the American part for some generations. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But people are going to be, when you arrive in the country, you are really, you have acquired a certain set of behaviors that are going to be very different from those on the ground. I mean, I'll just take myself as an example. I mean, I let my hair grow long. This is when I first arrived in the United States. I let my hair grow long. I go back, to Lebanon. The first thing is like, I have, like shame. And immediately they wanted to shave my head off. And immediately they're telling me that my Arabic has become so rusty. It's not. But the point is, you have to reconnect and regain. So it's going to take a lot of patience in that process. But eventually you will get to that story, more likely than not, if you build that relationship over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does take a lot of patience, and I appreciate you mentioning some of these organizations, and we'll put some links to some of those for people to use to as resources for themselves and for their families. Um, so I'm just looking here really quickly at some of the comments that we're getting. Yeah, they're talking about language barriers. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So do you want me to take some of these and go through them?
Yeah, let's. So here, one of them is about languages. For me personally, I'm willing to pay for research services, but don't know who to go to. For example, my inability to read, write in Arabic is extremely difficult to get started. From my experience, I've turned to Facebook groups, connections to Ramallah group. That's great. And local history museums for as much as I can get. So that's a great endorsement. So happy to hear that, David Al-Halta. Thank you so much. We have people even looking for South Africa records.
Yeah, and again, I mean, to be very frank here, none of us are going to be able to tell you everything about every record there because I mean, I focus a lot on my work on Lebanon, and even there, if you ask me where are these records, I can tell you. You can go to the municipality, you can go to the local parish, you can go to the Islamic Sharia court. You can, if you're really desperate, you can go to the Ministry of Interior, which has some of the Ottoman records, but it's nearly impossible to get to. Again, once you start reading Arabic, for example, we have a massive Arabic newspaper database that you can search with, but it requires knowledge of Arabic. So there are tools that are digital, but there isn't going to be one answer to everything, honestly. So, for example, somebody asked about Algeria, death records of persons sworn from Algeria. Yeah. So if we're talking, I assume that person is asking about death records for people who passed away in Algeria rather than the United States, because in the United States, obviously their death records would be here.
Yeah.
In Algeria, there are two sources where you'd find, and it depends upon what time period we're talking about. If you're talking about 1960 and before, when Algeria between 1832 and 1960 was under French control, then a lot of records actually have been shipped back to places like Marseille and Aix-en-Provence, where there's a lot of records that have been carried over, what's called the colonial records. Nonetheless, you'll still find, again, in the Sharia course, there are these records, and in the local municipalities, what they call them city hall, you would find those records. So that's going to be very localized. But I can't really speak beyond that because I'm not sure if Algeria has centralized any of their records. And that's a question that only by talking to people who've done genealogical research in Algeria can you answer that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. In the sense of what I'm hearing you also say is having a little bit of understanding of the history of the era where your relatives may have lived, for example, like the understanding of the colonization, I can't even say the word, of Algeria. Like potentially records could be in France, potentially records could be in Algeria. And so that might also spur new doorways for you to go into to find some of those records that you're looking for. We're getting people asking about South Africa, about Jewish Mideast roots too.
Sure.
Again, I think those same concepts seem to, I would say, apply kind of across the board, really, to almost any country you're doing research in as an immigrant, right, where your family came from as well. So I think that's really helpful. One of the comments too talked about their family name had changed and has now become Thomas. We know Danny Thomas, the great entertainer of the 50s and 60s. So that could also be another challenge is tracing your family name and its evolution as people arrived and now are writing their name in using different set of alphabet, right? But not with all the same sounds as certainly like the Arabic language might have, and try to trace that back can also be a challenge as well. I think this is like really great advice. What I've heard you say today, Akram, is as we embark on our family history, as we're trying to connect with those roots, number one, we definitely need to be patient, right? And to be humble and to really go on this journey of discovery, right? And to be patient with ourselves and also with the resources that are hopefully over time becoming more increasingly available. And second, I've heard you also say that building trust amongst family members near and far, and also maybe with organizations, using those bridges of trust to hopefully help us to connect with people who might have those records, and to also have those conversations with family and help them to know that it's about building connection amongst our family, not about some economic goal that we have from there as well. And then one thing I do want you to mention, we talked about language, and many people have listed that language is a challenge. I know that you're doing some work with handwriting analysis because, like you said, written script is even more difficult to decipher than typewritten. Sure. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the advancements that are being made in science that are hopefully will help the rest of us be able to, again, bridge that gap?
Absolutely. So we are partnering with Family Search. Plus, we have a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to develop what's called Arabic handwritten text recognition. Because before, I would argue, before the 1960s even, most genealogical records, if not all, were handwritten in one form or another. So the massive number of the hundreds of millions of records, whether it is during the Ottoman period, during the colonial period, or during the independence period, is going to be handwritten. And one of the challenges of that, of course, is how do we digitize this stuff and make it searchable as digital text? And so, as I said, we've partnered with Family Search, and we have received funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities to create, in essence, an AI system that will take these handwritten records and automatically transfer them into digital text. I mean, and the purpose for that, of course, is to speed up considerably, massively, the transcription of handwritten records, genealogical records, into digital data. And that would be a huge advantage. I mean, I will use this word, I rarely use it, but it would be a revolutionary development. We hope that this will be a 2-year project in which we begin to see some real, results. And, we already are seeing early on in the last 6 months, some really hopeful results. But there was also as you know, Natalie, the challenge of getting to those records as well, and then convincing those who hold the records that we would love to scan them and turn them into digital text. And that's a process that, again, we have partnered with Family Search to have conversations and to run pilot projects in the Middle East, specifically in Lebanon, on that. And that's a very challenging process because not every organization is going to trust us with this. But certainly, I think what I'm hoping with this project is that when we develop this technology and we create a pilot project in which we take some census records locally and we digitize them and we turn them into a searchable database, people will see this amazing recognition because there's an incredible thirst, as we see from the questions, amongst Middle East populations in the diaspora, anywhere they are, South America, North America, Australia, Sub-Saharan Africa, to really understand where they come from. This is natural. And, we will do everything we can to help facilitate that. But again, I think while we're doing that, I would reemphasize that it's important to start collecting these histories that are already there. Talk to your family members, right? Talk and record these stories because they will disappear. And quite honestly, we need to learn the lessons of how difficult it is to look back 4 or 5 generations to find our roots, for us to begin, recording our history now so that 4 or 5 generations from now, people will have a much easier time learning who we are.
Yeah, that's really great advice. It's not just about the past, but how do we take it forward into the future? We are the history for somebody else, the future generations, and how do we move that forward? And I'm really excited for the things that you're doing from a technological standpoint. I think it's going to be a huge help on so many levels. Somebody even asked in the comments about Ottoman records. Certainly for the Middle East, they've had over 500 years of Ottoman history and Ottoman rule, right, with all those records. So that's one project. We at Family Search are really working hard to access those records and then, again, make them searchable so people can find their family from there too. In closing, I also wanted to just quickly share one tool that anybody can use on Family Search to go in and put in their family names. I'm going to share my screen here really quickly. And so what we've got here is you can go into Family Search and search our historical records. You can just go into the simple tool and put in your last name. So my maiden name is Bahuth. Helps to spell it correctly. And then you can hit search. And what it'll do is it'll go through the records found on Family Search, and we have a lot of records, and it'll start to give me people with the same last name. all around the world, anywhere we have records. I'll admit most of our records are, most of the records on Family Search tend to be towards the West, but we have many records in the Middle East as well. But we can go in, and this is a great place too, to start to build connections. You can go into these individuals, you can see who added their name, maybe something about them, and grow your family tree and develop it from there. So it could be another resource for everybody as well too. So our time is up. Thank you everyone for joining us. Akram, thank you so much for that great insight. And we really appreciate all the effort you're doing to continue to preserve history, really, not just of families, obviously of regions, to help us have a better understanding of ourselves, of our communities and our families, and for the technological advances you're interested in. We definitely at Family Search are so glad we're partnering with you. Thank you everybody for joining us. Please continue your comments. If you have other questions, we'll definitely continue to address them. We also have, we'll put in the web links for both FamilySearch.org as well as the Khairallah Center. Please feel free to use those resources in your research and reach out to us. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Natalie.